Marcus Ellison was 39 years old when his wife of 11 years handed him a set of divorce papers across a kitchen table he had built with his own hands, and told him, with the patience of someone who had been rehearsing the speech for a long time, that she was keeping the house, the accounts, the investment portfolio, and everything else she had documented as marital assets. He read the papers carefully. He poured himself a glass of water. He set the papers down and nodded once, the way a man nods when someone gives him directions he already knows. She told him her attorney had been thorough. She told him the settlement was fair. She told him he was getting the work truck, his tools, and 60 days to find somewhere else to live. What Diane did not tell him, what Diane had never once thought to ask, was whose name appeared on the LLC that had quietly owned her favorite restaurant for the past 6 years, or what that company was actually worth. She thought she was divorcing a project manager with a modest salary, a 15-year-old pickup truck, and a joint account she had already transferred. She thought she was walking away clean with everything. She had been planning this exit for nearly 2 years, and in all that planning, she had never once gone looking for the door she had never seen. She should have looked. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning Marcus signed his name on those papers, he drove to a job site in southwest Charlotte before sunrise, the way he had done nearly every weekday for the better part of a decade. The truck smelled like sawdust and coffee and the particular staleness of early hours. He parked, cut the engine, and sat for a moment listening to the cooling metal tick in the quiet before a workday begins. He was a structural engineer by training, a construction project manager by trade, and a man who had long understood that the most important work on any building happened underground, in the foundation, where nobody looked and almost nobody cared until something went wrong. He had spent his career making sure things didn't go wrong. He was good at it. He was patient. He understood that buildings, like most things worth having, took longer to destroy than they took to build. His grandmother, Ida, had told him something along those lines when he was 17 and frustrated with a woodworking project that kept warping. She had stood in her kitchen doorway in her housecoat, watching him, and said, "Baby, wood moves because it's still alive. You don't fight it, you account for it." Ida had been gone for 4 years. He still heard her most mornings. He had met Diane at a mutual friend's cookout in Gastonia 11 years ago when she was laughing at something near the grill, and her laughter was the kind that made people nearby start smiling without knowing why. She had been finishing her MBA. He had just passed his professional engineer's exam. They had talked for 3 hours about nothing in particular, and he had driven home that night certain something had shifted in the architecture of his life. For a long time, things were what they appeared to be. She built her marketing consultancy. He built buildings and managed projects, and on weekends built things around the house. A deck, a pergola, a kitchen backsplash he laid tile by tile on a Saturday when she was visiting her sister in Raleigh. He was good at building things for her. He thought, for a long time, that she understood what that meant. But somewhere in the past 2 years, something had gone quiet between them in a way he could not name precisely, but could feel in the way she tilted her phone when he walked into a room, the way she ended calls when he came near, the small practiced warmth of a woman who had moved on and not yet said so. He told himself it was stress. He told himself it was the distance that settles between two people after a decade. He told himself it was nothing. He was a structural engineer. He should have known that a building doesn't fail all at once. It fails in the places you stop checking. The envelope had arrived 8 days ago. He had been expecting it. He had been expecting it because 6 weeks before that, he had come home on a Thursday afternoon. A city inspection had wrapped early. Project was ahead of schedule. and found a name he didn't recognize saved in her phone when it lit up on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. One name, saved under initials, the kind of thing you did when you didn't want a name to be immediately readable to someone glancing over your shoulder. He had stood there and looked at it and said nothing. He had put the phone back exactly where it was. He had gone to the garage and picked up a piece of oak he'd been planning to plane into a shelf, and he had worked on it for 40 minutes in silence. And he had thought about his grandmother, and about foundations, and about the things that move in the dark that you have to account for before you build. He hadn't panicked. He was a structural engineer. The first thing you did always was assess before you acted. He had not slept deeply in 6 weeks, but he had worked. That was the distinction Marcus had always made. Sleep was optional, work was not. Between midnight and 4 a.m. On more nights than he could count, he had sat at the desk in the spare bedroom with the door closed and a lamp low and the second laptop open. The one he kept in the locked drawer of the tool chest in the garage, the one Diane had never asked about because she had never thought to ask. The phone notification had been the first loose thread. The financial statements had been the sweater it unraveled. He had pulled their joint accounts first. 3 years of statements, downloaded in PDF format, transferred to an encrypted folder he had created the same night he stood in the kitchen looking at her phone. He was methodical about it. He built a spreadsheet, the way he built project timelines, with columns and categories and a running total at the bottom that he updated as new data came in. His hands didn't shake. His face remained perfectly calm. He had known, on some level, before he started, what he was going to find. Finding it only confirmed the measurement, $41,200. That was the total of the incremental transfers he identified over 22 months. Amounts small enough individually that they read like normal household expenses, but patterned in a way that no honest accountant would mistake for anything other than intentional repositioning of funds. 300 here, 800 there, a check written to a vendor he did not recognize that turned out, after a brief search, to be a shell for a private storage account registered in her name only. 2 months. She had been building her exit while he was building her deck. He cross-referenced the dates with his own calendar. The first transfer had happened 4 days after he'd come home late from a project in Concord and found her on the back porch on the phone, cutting the call short, saying she hadn't heard him pull up. He had thought nothing of it then. He thought about it now. He photographed the spreadsheet. He printed 2 copies. He saved the original in 3 separate encrypted locations. Then he opened the folder on the second laptop, the one he had labeled simply with a single letter, the kind of label that looks like a filing code to anyone who doesn't know better. And he added the first page of the financial documentation to what was already there. What was already there was considerable. He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment and thought about what his grandmother had said about wood that warped. You don't fight it. You account for it. He picked up his phone and sent a single text message to a number he had not used in 8 months. 4 words. I need a meeting. The response came back in under a minute. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. Name the place. He named the place. He closed the laptop. He went to bed and slept for the first time in weeks. Her name was Claudette Marsh, and she had been practicing family and civil law in Charlotte for 27 years. And in that time she had seen nearly every variation of marital dissolution the human imagination could produce. She did not rattle easily. She had the kind of stillness in her office that made people want to speak carefully and mean what they said. She reviewed the documents Marcus brought in a brown, expandable folder. The bank statements, the transfer records, the LLC registration papers, the trust documents, the property assessments. The correspondence his CPA had prepared in a format specifically designed for legal proceedings. She read without comment for 11 minutes. Then she set the last page down and folded her hands and looked at him. She filed without a forensic accountant, she said. It wasn't a question. Her attorney didn't know what to look for, Marcus said. Because she didn't know what existed. Claudette nodded once. Her settlement offer is based on disclosed marital assets. Correct. She's not aware of the LLC structure. She has never been. It predates the marriage by 3 years. It was established under a holding company that carries my grandmother's initials. Diane knew I consulted independently on the side. She did not know the scope. Claudette looked at him for a moment with the precise, measuring expression of a woman doing fast arithmetic. How long have you been preparing this? I've been organized for 12 years, Marcus said. I've been preparing for this specific moment for about 6 weeks. She allowed herself a small, controlled smile. Then, here is what we're going to do. She walked him through it methodically, the same way he would have walked a new site engineer through a project sequence. Counterfiling, discovery requests, a forensic accounting deposition, a formal valuation of the LLC holdings and all subsidiary assets. A challenge to the transfer records as potential dissipation of marital funds, which they were, by statute, regardless of what Diane's attorney thought they were. The settlement Diane had constructed would not survive a proper disclosure process. Nothing built on incomplete information ever did. You understand, Claudette said, that this becomes significantly more uncomfortable for her once discovery begins. I understand, Marcus said. And you're comfortable with that? I'm clear, Marcus said. That's different from comfortable. She nodded. She picked up her pen. They got to work. 3 days later, Marcus drove to Greensboro on a Sunday and sat in the living room of his Uncle Rollins' house and drank sweet tea and let the older man talk for a while before getting to the point. Roland Ellison was 68 and had spent his career as a master electrician and had the hands to prove it, and the patience of a man who had spent decades working in the dark interior spaces of buildings that other people got to take credit for. He had known Marcus since Marcus was 4 years old. He had taught Marcus how to read a blueprint. He had sat in the front row at Marcus's graduation, and he had stood quietly near the back at Marcus's wedding, and he had called Marcus the week after just to check. She never liked that you were smarter than her, Rollins said. He said it the way you state the weather. Informational, not unkind. She liked that I was capable, Marcus said. She didn't know the difference. Most people don't. Roland set his tea glass down. Your grandmother knew, though, she told me. After that wedding, she said, Roland, that girl loves what Marcus can do. I'm not sure she loves Marcus. I didn't say anything to you then because I hoped she was wrong. She wasn't often wrong. No, she was not. Roland was quiet for a moment. What do you need from me? Nothing. I just needed to sit here for a little while. Roland nodded and didn't push, because he was the kind of man who understood that some things you don't say. They sat in the quiet of his living room, and the afternoon light moved across the floor the way it does in houses that have been lived in for a long time, slowly and without hurry. Before Marcus left, Roland walked him to the truck and gripped his arm once at the elbow and said, Build something better when this is done. Marcus drove back to Charlotte in the dark. He had 4 weeks left in the house. Meanwhile, Claudette's forensic accounting contact, a compact, precise woman named Bernice, who had testified as an expert witness in over 100 proceedings, had completed her preliminary review of the LLC portfolio and delivered a number that appeared in a sealed document that Marcus read once, quietly, at his kitchen table while Diane was at a client dinner. The number was $2.3 million. That was the current assessed value of the LLC and its subsidiaries, including the commercial property it held outright, the consulting contracts tied to it, and the silent partnership interest in 3 restaurant ventures, one of which was Diane's favorite dining establishment in South End, the one she had taken her friends to for the past 5 years and referred to as a hidden gem, never once asking who owned it. Bernice had also found something else. Diane's primary business account, the consultancy, had received 2 payments in the past 14 months from a firm registered in Delaware with no public-facing presence and no website. The payments totaled $38,000. The Delaware firm was registered to a man whose name appeared in one other document in Marcus's folder, the phone contact Diane had saved under initials. That was not a coincidence. That was a pattern, and patterns were evidence. Marcus photographed the document, added it to the folder. Then he went to bed, because tomorrow was a workday, and the project didn't stop. He came home to dinner twice more before the filing deadline. Both times, Diane made something simple, pasta once, grilled chicken the second time, and they ate at the table he had built and talked about small things. A neighbor's new dog, a pothole on their street, whether the gutters needed cleaning before winter. He answered her questions. He cleared his plate. He asked about her week and listened to the answer. He was not performing. He was simply waiting. This was the part of the process that most people found impossible, the maintenance of ordinary life while extraordinary things moved underneath it. Marcus did not find it impossible. He had spent his career working below the surface of things. He understood that real power operated in quiet rooms, and that the most important structural work was always the work that didn't show. He kissed her cheek on the way to the sink. She had no idea. The mediation was scheduled for a Thursday morning in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building in uptown Charlotte, and Diane arrived with her attorney, a sharp man named Gerard who wore good suits and had the confident posture of someone who believed he had already won, and they were already seated when Marcus came in with Claudette and Bernice and a second attorney, a civil litigator named Harold, who specialized in asset recovery and fraud claims, and had agreed to join the case 4 days after Claudette made one phone call. Diane looked at Harold. Then she looked at Bernice. Then she looked at the 2 accordion folders on Marcus's side of the table. Something in her expression shifted, barely, a tightening at the jaw, a slight recalibration, the way a person's face changes when a room does not look the way they expected it to. Gerard maintained his posture. He was a professional. He began by restating the terms of Diane's proposed settlement, which he described as generous and comprehensive. He used the word equitable 4 times. Claudette let him finish. Then she placed the first document on the table and slid it toward him. It was the LLC registration. 3 years premarital, clean chain of title, notarized and certified. Gerard looked at it without touching it. Claudette placed the second document beside it. The property assessment, the valuation summary, the subsidiary holdings, the consulting contract portfolio. Then Bernice placed her report. 41 pages. Executive summary on top. Then Harold placed the fraud filing, the preliminary civil complaint documenting the $41,200 in incremental transfers, the Delaware entity, the pattern of payments, the relationship between Diane's co-signatory and the shell company that had received her consultancy payments. The room was quiet in a way that conference rooms rarely are. Gerard picked up the LLC document. He read the first page. He read the second. He set it down carefully, the way you set down something that has just changed the weight of what you're holding. Diane's voice, when it came, was lower than Marcus expected. "Marcus, I think we can." Let your attorney speak, Claudette said. Not unkindly. Firmly, Diane looked at Gerard. Gerard was already recalibrating. He asked for a 15-minute recess. Claudette declined politely and suggested they continue, given the schedule. You need to understand, Diane said, leaning slightly forward, and her voice had found a different register now, softer, almost intimate. The voice she used when she wanted something, that I did what I did because I felt invisible. I felt like everything we had was yours, really, and I was just living in the margins of it, and I needed something that was. She built the deck, Marcus said. Everyone looked at him. He said it again, quietly. She asked me to build a deck, and I built her a deck and a pergola, and I retiled the kitchen, and I laid hardwood in the master bedroom, and I did all of it because I thought that's what you did for someone you loved. You built things for them. He paused. I didn't know she was also building an exit. He let that settle. The LLC predates this marriage by 36 months, he said. The company held during the marriage did not commingle with marital funds at any point, as Bernice's report documents. The proposed settlement was structured around assets that do not include this entity, which means the settlement as proposed is not legally complete. Claudette will walk you through what complete disclosure requires. He stood. Diane, I hope you find what you were looking for. He said it without irony. Without volume. I genuinely do. But you're not taking my grandmother's company, and your attorney is going to advise you not to try. He picked up his jacket. He nodded to Claudette and Harold and Bernice. He walked to the door, and he did not look back. And the room was silent behind him, the way rooms are when a question has been answered so thoroughly that there is nothing left to ask. Some things, he thought, as the elevator doors closed, were worth building right from the start. 8 months later, Marcus was sitting on the back porch of a renovated craftsman bungalow in the Noda neighborhood of Charlotte. A house he had purchased outright through the LLC and spent 3 months making exactly what he wanted it to be. Bamboo floors throughout. A kitchen with the kind of counter depth he had always wanted. A workshop in the back that smelled like cedar and linseed oil and possibility. The back porch he had built himself, board by board, on weekends in late spring, and he had sealed it with a finish that would hold for 20 years if he maintained it properly. He was not alone. A woman named Renee was inside making coffee and listening to something low and jazzy on the kitchen speaker. She was a civil engineer at a firm he had collaborated with twice on commercial projects. A direct and curious person who asked good questions about the things that mattered to her and did not perform warmth she didn't feel. She had come into his life the way quiet things do, gradually and then obviously. And she had never once asked him to explain himself to her, because she had understood him on the first conversation and had not found him wanting. He had signed the LLC's largest contract of the decade 2 months prior, a mixed-use development in the emerging corridor south of the city, worth more than anything his name had ever been on. Claudette had called to congratulate him. Roland had called and said, simply, that Ida would have been proud. As for Diane, he had heard about it the way you hear about things that happen at a distance, through mutual acquaintances who did not know they were telling him anything in particular. The civil fraud case had been settled quietly, with terms that included restitution of the transferred funds, a confidentiality agreement, and a structured payment plan that would follow her for several years. Her consultancy had lost 2 anchor clients in the aftermath of the discovery process. Clients who had their own attorneys and their own concerns about liability. The man whose name had appeared under initials in her phone had relocated to Atlanta, where he had his own complications now. Her mother had not spoken to her since the documents became public. Marcus did not gloat. He registered the information the way he registered project completion reports, as data points confirming that the work had held, that what had been built had held, that the foundation had been sound all along. The coffee appeared beside him, set down by a hand he had come to trust, and Renee sat in the other chair without needing to fill the quiet, because she was a structural engineer by training, and she understood that some structures only work if you leave room for the load to settle. He watched the morning move across the yard he had planted himself. A Japanese maple in the far corner, tomatoes along the south fence splitting at the seams with their own weight, a section of grass coming in thick, and even where bare dirt had been 6 months ago. He was free. He was solvent. He was unbothered. And everything worth keeping, he had built himself. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.